Welcome to ISType. Hoş geldiniz. İyi akşamlar. As you all know, ISType has been going on for quite some time. We organize these large conferences. Then we have these mono sessions where we invite a single speaker to in the future, maybe we were planning to make duos, to have two consecutive speakers, but we're still playing with that idea. Anyway, today I really have the privilege and honor to introduce you to Riccardo Olocco. He is a highly influential type designer whose research and the methodologies that he devised in his research and particularly in his PhD research at University of Reading have become a source for numerous type designers to follow and to develop new forms and new shapes and new typefaces, or at least to understand how to look at a typeface, how to look at a model, what constitutes a model, and then when does a model start deviating from its roots. In fact, even roots are being reconsidered in certain phases, certain parts. His work, it is actually a dream to have him here. I just had the opportunity to meet with him in Armenia this past summer, and I was like, "Hey, Riccardo, will you come and speak at ISType Mono?" It's like, "Yeah, sure." He's like having his wine, of course. So now he's here, and we're really happy to have him. But I think my graduate student, Bartu Basharan, who did pretty much most of the work to organize this event, and without his help, especially due to some of the personal issues that I had with my health, there is no way I could have organized this, but Bartu did basically everything he put together. So I do want to, I'm mentioning Bartu not only to thank him, but also to let the audience know that Bartu was the happiest person when I told him that, okay, Bartu, guess who I met in Armenia? And he was like, who? Riccardo Olocco. And he was like, get out. I'm like, yeah, I know. And he will be coming to Istanbul. He's going to give a talk at ISType. And Bartu was so happy because Bartu is currently authoring his master's thesis, which is on a somewhat similar topic, and where he has been referencing Riccardo's work and basing Riccardo's certain methodologies that he devised. So it is it's a big day for not only me but also for Bartu. So would you like to say anything?
Hi, hello. Welcome all. Thank you for being here, and also thank you, Riccardo. It's such a joy, and it's very important event in bigger pictures. ISType is my nearly maybe legacy project for both of us. So yeah, it's very important for me. But especially this event has a special meaning for me because all of my thesis project journey connects with somehow Riccardo. So it's organizing these events is like making myself a favor, basically. So enjoy.
Thank you. Okay, so now please welcome Riccardo Olocco.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's the first time in Istanbul, your beautiful city. I'm really impressed. I mean, I knew that I would have been impressed, but It's very nice to be here. Thank you very much. So, and I'm a type designer, and I've been studying a lot of 15th century type, early 16th century. Now I moved a little bit further. Now I'm more, well, not more, but I'm working also on 18th century things. But today I will talk just about 15th century. This is roughly the main topics we're going to see today. I'm trying to stay within 50 minutes. I hope but I have a time, a clock, so I will. At least the last part will be very fast if I'm not able to keep the pace. So I will start with an overview of the first type that we had in Europe, first type that was produced and used in Europe. And then I will move to Venice and to show the inception of Roman type, that is the type we are used to read every day, basically. And then I will make a little detour in the work of Nicholas Jenson in his rotunda types. Rotunda was the other kind of shape of Gothic type that was common in Europe in the 15th century, the other apart from the textura that we are going to see right now. Then I will talk about the digital revival of the Etna that I did with a friend of mine, Michele Patanei, lives and works in London, and we did it as an example to show how to make a revival in our idea, let's say. And finally, I will show how to use a typeface that I designed some years ago. It was actually the typeface I designed in my master thesis in Reading, and it's called Xenon. And it's just to show how you can use historical sources to make something that is not a revival. So a difference between a revival and a type that is loosely based on historical sources. I think the contrast between the two things is pretty interesting. So we start from the beginning, the inception. Of course, everybody knows that in 1455, more or less, Gutenberg finished his Bible, his 42 lines Bible. And it was a massive job, of course. It's the first printed, completely printed book. Now we're going to see what I mean with that. And here you see, first of all, I need to say that I love this screen. Never seen a screen so bright, so sharp as this. So I would like to see, really, I don't see the pixels from this size, so it's amazing. Anyway, you can enjoy the shape of the letters with this screen. So this is the textura. It was called textura of Gutenberg, of these 42 lines Bibles. And the textura of Gutenberg was just copied. It was, let's say, a revival. It was a revival of the writing style that writing masters were using in the place where Gutenberg was working, the center, the middle of Germany, at the time for writing books like Bibles or liturgical books. This is the shapes of the letters that they were using there. They can have different horizontal compression, but the main shape of the letters are always the same. Actually, here you see one of the very little examples of alternates. Let's say this A, you see? This is called the box A, and it's a very peculiar shape of A that you find in some textura. But it's not here. You see, here you have a more normal A. Well, let's say normal A. It's still a textura A, so we're not used to this kind of shapes today. This is the kind of books that were produced before Gutenberg. This is a book of hours. So this was a collection of prayers for lay people, not for priests. And so let's go back to Gutenberg. So his typeface is really, it was really peculiar. And we need to say that it was not Gutenberg's first type, because actually Gutenberg, before printing the Bible, you need to imagine that the Bible, we are talking about 400 or 500 pages, printed with, I don't remember how many thousands of types every page. So it was a massive job. We cannot think that someone invented printing and it started with it was a suicide. So before printing the Bible, actually Gutenberg Gutenberg supervised, because Gutenberg was not cutting, supervised the cutting of another type that has exactly the same shapes, is slightly bigger in point size. It's a slightly bigger point size. but it's much rougher, as you can see, as a shape of letters, and you can see that it doesn't have a very proper baseline. It's very rough. This is what we are seeing. It's actually the oldest piece of printing, surviving piece of printing that we have in Europe. And it was printed on paper. It was probably 2 leaves, we don't know, because just this little piece survived. And this little piece, it was part of a bigger sheet, of printed sheet that you can see, and the only surviving part is that. So I'll just go back to this to show it. And this was a German poem in German. And it was very famous at the time, and there were many copies handwritten, and this was printed. And this is considered the first survived piece of movable type printing in Europe. With the same type, Gutenberg and his assistants printed many other pieces. Usually they were Donatus. Donatus was a guy from Rome who wrote some grammars. And these grammars were still used in the Middle Age and also in the Renaissance to teach kids how to write and read, basically. You can imagine that it's not very handy to teach a kid how to write and read on this piece of paper, but this is how they did it. And so this type that was called the decay type, from the bibliographers, we have no idea how Gutenberg called it. It was called like this because it was Donatus and calendar. And Donatus and calendars were basically the most common things that were printed with this type. So Gutenberg, just to show a close-up, Gutenberg was using this type before the Bible and after the Bible, basically, to print small things, what we today call ephemera. None of these pieces survived as books, but they survived as things like this, or even worse, as things like this. This is something that I found in Mainz. This is a little piece like this, and it's absolutely useless. But because all these pieces were used to make bindings in the 15th century. To make a binding in the 15th century, you had to make a cardboard, and they didn't have cardboard. So they were taking pieces of paper and pieces of parchment, gluing them together to make a thick, like cardboard, and then they were using as a binding. The bibliographers in the 19th century realized this, and they started taking apart the bindings, and they found thousands of fragments from the early years of 15th century. All the things that you saw so far were fragments in bindings. So this is also why they look not very good. Another thing that Gutenberg printed during his Bible, because he printed at the end of 54, and this Bible was ready in the beginning, on the first half of 55, was this. This is I don't know in English, indulgence, indulgenza in Italian, and in Latin is the same. It's a very odd thing. Basically, you have this paper, you are signing with your name, you see that there are some handwritten things, and you are giving a lot of money, and all your sins were just solved. So you could go to heaven, basically. This was something that was sold to people, to normal people. And Gutenberg printed many of them. And from the fact that we have signs and dates, we can date them. There is a lot of studying about them. He used 2 types in this piece of printing. The bigger type is the decay type, the one that we just saw. And then he used another type that is based on the calligraphic style of Gothic calligraphic style in Germany at the time. But what I'm interested in here is to show one peculiarity, and then I'm not going further than that, one peculiarity of the decay type and also of the Bible type. But basically, Gutenberg invented contextual alternates. If you are a type designer, you know what is this. So basically, depending on the neighborhood, depending on the letter that was before or after a certain letter, you can choose an alternative version of the same letter. You see here 2 shapes of E, basically. But you can also see 2 shapes of N, this N and the one on the end. Why he did this? He did this, clearly, as you can see, because he needed to space, to make a tighter spacing. Because, normally, a Gothic type has this, they call it spores. They come from writing, of course. They come from from the peculiar kind of writing of textura. But if you imagine this E placed after an R, there would be a lot of space between them. So they had to cast a new letter without the spurs. What you see here actually is that it didn't do what I would do today, that just I cast this letter and then I file off the two parts, but we don't know why. He cast two different letters coming from two different punches. You see how the two angles of the central bar of E are different. We don't know why he did this. And we think that the reason is because he was not using exactly the same method of casting that we know. But we don't know what he was doing. Not yet, at least. So, another image of this decay type. This is a type that I'm still studying. There have been a lot of studying from German scholars in the beginning of the 20th century, and then everything stopped. So, everything we have today comes from the beginning of the 20th century. We don't know much about this type. There are different states of this type, and the last state is for the 36-line Bibles. That is the other famous Bible of the early years of printing. We don't know who printed it. Probably it was not printed in Mainz. It was printed in Bamberg, a city close to Mainz. Somebody thinks that it was printed by Gutenberg, but there is no evidence about that. So, until this point, this is 1457, until this point, Gutenberg was the head of the only printing workshop that was existing in Europe, in Mainz. But this book basically marks the beginning of the new ventures. His assistant, Peter Schiffer, and his baker, I mean the guy who put the money, that was Johannes Fust, just kicked out Gutenberg and made a new company, the two of them, and printed this Psalter. This is particularly important because for the first time we have a colophon. So we have a date, a place of printing, and the name of the printers. This is the first time. With new textura types, by the way. The same people, Peter Schiffer and Fust, they kept on going on printing, and finally they stopped printing liturgic book, and they started printing other styles of books. But they realized that this shape of the textura could not work well for other kinds of, genre of books. So they went for a new style of type. This is very strange thing, because this is the only early type that is not strongly related to a certain handwriting. So this is more historical thought that this is how German scholars who studied in Italy and pick up the humanistic traits of handwriting were writing in Germany. So it's a mixture between Roman and Gothic type. And this is how it was called. It is called Gotico Antiqua. Antiqua for German means Roman. And one of the most peculiar thing is the G that has an 8 shape, you see. This is a very interesting type. It has many variants. It has a lot of alternatives for capitals. Now we see a couple of them. It has different shapes for G, for instance. And it's pretty well done. You still have, just for U and for I, where is it? You still have two versions, but depends to a contextual alternate to make, two letters closer one to the other. These are ligatures and capitals. You see there are many, like 3 shapes of Q, 3 shapes of U, and so on. 2 shapes of N. It's very, very, very rich as a design. And as a matter of fact, some people in Nancy, Anarte Nancy, before pandemic, I think it was 2019, they made a project out of this. They made a contemporary project. They made revivals of many of these Gothic Antiqua types, and they are all available as open source fonts. That's a very good project. Anyway, last thing is that this kind of shapes became extremely influential. So this was end of the 50s. For all the 60s in Germany, people were printing only with this shape of letters. Everybody was copying Peter Schiffer. This idea of copying the most successful printer went on for centuries, you know. It was the normal thing. So, two monks actually, but they are thought to have been working with Gutenberg in Mainz. They set up the first printing shop in Italy, in Subiaco, in the monastery of Subiaco, close to Rome, and they start printing with these letter forms that they cut. We know because there are documents that say that one of the two guys were a punch cutter, basically. He knew how to cut punches. And this is another type that is called half Roman, half Gothic. Actually, it doesn't have much of Gothic, apart from the thickness, because it's pretty bold, you know, for being a Roman. But all the rest is pretty Roman. It's very similar to the kind of humanistic script they were using in Florence in the beginning of the 15th century. The same two guys, a few years later, moved to Rome, and they start printing in Rome with another size because recently we knew from some new documents, I mean newly discovered documents, that basically they had to leave the type to Subiaco. It was part of a deal. The monastery gave them money to print, and when they left, they had to leave printers, presses, and type and everything to the monastery. I don't know if they printed anything more. Anyway, this is an interesting look at A, the shape of A. This is interesting. We don't know where they took this, but it's probably from some very old Carolingian manuscript. So not, you know, humanistic things, but really from, you know, 5, 6 centuries before them. Here you see a little close-up. The A is really, letter A is really, you know, Carolingian. Okay, so this is kind of background to reach, more or less, it's very shallow, very fast, to reach Venice. And what I'm going to show now comes from a book that from a research that most of it found its way in this book that I published last year, because basically this book is called the Jenson Roman, or the most influential type in the history of printing. This is quite bold as a statement, but I still think that it's like this because, and now I'm trying to explain why actually. So after Rome, the first place in Italy where printers, where printing with movable type started was Venice. Venice at the time was the most, not the city with the highest number of population, but the richest and most famous city in Europe. It was a hub, a commercial hub, and they have a lot of industries inside the cities also, and they had 3 times the population of today, just to give an example. As a number of editions from the 15th century that survived in libraries around the world, we know that 13% of them were printed in Venice. But actually this is, you know, the number of edition doesn't tell you much because, you know, one edition can be a small, you know, very small book or a huge book of hundreds of pages. And you can imagine that with the same effort that you print 3 pages of this size, you print almost 1 book of a small size, almost. So if we take the folios, books that were just printed and the paper was folded once. So a folio format is usually related to the biggest sizes of books. If we just check, you know, the folios, so the big books, we see that the share of Venetian books is much higher, is 21%. There are really huge numbers in Venice. Also because Venice, as I said, it was a hub, it was a commercial hub. So it was very easy to take the books. The books were not binding. You need to imagine that the books were getting out from the workshop unbounded, and they were going to the shops unbounded, and the people were buying either unbounded or asking to the shop to bound them, basically. You had these 2 options. But most of the books that were traveling around were unbounded, so they were put into barrels, squeezed into barrels, and put into galleys, and, you know, through rivers and sea, they were going everywhere in Europe. Here you see a route of the main routes, commercial routes from Venice at the late Middle Age, basically. It was incredible because it took, you know, in a few days, it was in the northern of Germany. Because basically, Jenson and the most successful printers in Venice, they allied with traders, with merchants. So they were going, books were going with silk, with spices, with all these things that were really, really important at the time. In Venice, the first person who started printing with movable type was a German, of course, because so far we've seen only German printing. It was a German. It was Johannes da Spira, von Speyer. Speyer is a small town close to Mainz. We think he worked with Gutenberg, but we have no idea about that. And this is considered the first Roman type of history. Why is considered the first Roman type? Because of these things. Because it's the first time that we see in the bottom of a lowercase proper serifs, with bilateral serifs that comes from both the side of the stems. Just serifs that were taken from the capitals, because serif in the capitals, they've been there for thousands of years. So people started to adding this just to blend the lowercase better with the uppercase. They start doing this. One interesting thing is letter H. Letter H, the usual way of writing letter H was this. It was a round H. It came from Anchal script. So just a few months after Spira, Nicholas Jenson, who was French actually, opened his shop in Venice and he printed this book. This is the first book that he printed, or at least the first that survived so far. And you can see that the shapes of the letter are extremely familiar, extremely new, contemporary, very similar to what we are used today. And his age is the age that we use today. He was the first one to do this age. Actually, some calligraphers had already did an age like this, but Jenson was the first in printing. Jenson based, like da Spira, based their types on humanistic scripts. Humanistic script was the script of the rich people of the time, because a Gothic script was the script for every day, for everything. While humanistic script was the script for copying, classical things, classical authors like Cicero and so on. But the problem with the humanistic script is that humanistic script was started at the beginning of the 15th century. So after 70 years, they started using humanistic script as a model for type. And this 70 years was not much to stabilize, to make the script stable. So basically, I'm showing just a few examples of different script from the about 1450s. So script that maybe some printers could have looked at. Here you see 3 examples. There was not a canon. There was not a single style. There were many styles, many hands. Look at just the different how they write G, letter G. You see there are 3 different ways, but also the strokes of the letters, the way they use the pen is different. And these 3 are 3 humanistic scripts from the same time, from the same place. That was Venice, close to Venice. So there was this huge variety, something that we don't have in Gothic type, because Gutenberg had a model that had been there for 300 years almost when he started using that. And the same Jenson with Rotunda. The Rotunda was stabilized at the end of the 13th century. So it became, a canon. Humanistic script was not like that. So, Jenson. Jenson actually was an extremely interesting character because, he opened a shop in Venice in 1470, and he became very successful, very rich, and he died 10 years later. He came from some place in northern France, but several years ago, some historians, some French historians that were connected to the mind, to the mind where coins were struck, basically, of Paris, they found documents that say that in 1458, the King of France, was Henry VIII, asked the mind of Paris to send a punch cutter to Mainz, because he heard that in Mainz they had invented something with artificial writing. That was the name. And he wanted to send a spy to see what was happening. And we have a document that say that the chief, the boss of the mines of the mint of Paris said that he was going to send one of their best young punch cutters, Nicholas Jenson. We don't have any other information apart from this, so we don't know if Jenson went there. But anyway, the fact that Jenson was so successful in printing and in commercial things, we are talking about, people that were not used to make many jobs. I mean, if one was a punch cutter, he would have been a punch cutter all his life. But now we are talking about someone who was a punch cutter, who became a printer, and who became a successful businessman. So something extremely strange, something that could happen in the beginning of printing, because there was not, a proper trade. It was a new thing. It was like Silicon Valley in the 80s, yeah, more or less. Or, we are talking about Giorgio Moroder, like music, like digital music in the 80s, like these kind of things. It was completely new. So Jenson made a partnership with two German traders, two German merchants, and they were extremely successful in sending all his books from Rome to the north of Germany to England. So that was, to France. And we have documents where we know the names of the people who were, in charge for certain areas and how much books were cost and these kind of things. Jenson also left a last will. He died in September of 1480, and his last will survived in Venice, in the State Archive of Venice, and we have two lines written by him. It starts saying, Ego Nicolaus Jenson, I, Nicholas Jenson, blah, blah, blah. So he was dying. We know that in the beginning of the will he said that he was still in his head. I mean, his head was still bright, but his body was not. And we know that he died a few days later. This is the character set. So the characters, the uppercase and lowercase letters, and a few other characters of a Jenson Roman. I will make just a little detour just to explain, because I think it could be interesting to some of you, how I do these images, how I analyze the images, because analyzing the images is one important part of my research. So basically, I take two kinds of photographs of books. The first is pretty normal, so a reflex camera with a tripod. I use a unit of measurements. I think you can see. Usually, normal screen don't show it, but this screen is very good. There is a little, what you call it, a little piece, a 3D printer, Passepartout, something like that. That is inside is 10 centimeters. So I have a unit of measurement, and I just shoot through that rectangle, basically. So I know the size. And so I take this kind of images because these images give me an overview of a type. I can study, the alignment of the letters. I can study the spacing. I can study several things about the overall, appearance of a type. But then I want to go further. I want to go closer, and I want to study the single letters. So after many trials, I did this. I found a very good loop. And with my loop, I went to a shop and I tried different cameras until I found one that fits very well within it. It's a Sony camera. And so I basically do this very strange, odd setup. Some librarians a little freaked out, but I had to explain very well, show and try to, yeah. And the kind of images I have are this. And what is very important to me is that there is a scale of measurement, because at the bottom of the loop there is a scale of measurement. This is 10th of millimeters, so I can go very detailed to that. And I achieve, images like this, where I can study single letter forms. This is Jenson. This is from Jenson Roman. What I do, I choose the best letters, and I just, select them. I made documents, very rough documents like this, where I gather many samples of letters, and then at the end I choose the best, the sharpest one. I make some images like this. So, starting from this, why I say that Jenson Roman was the most influential? First thing, because he invented certain letter forms. He invented the shapes of certain letter forms that are completely different from the letters that were used by his competitors. So I'll just focus on these few letters, and I just show a few examples, otherwise it would be too time-consuming. So this that I'm showing on top are other printers in the same year that Jenson started in Venice. And you can see the difference in letter forms. Round age, the G was always very strange, and other things very strange are going on. Look at the E here. This was another kind of E that was used in humanistic script. It's pretty normal. And also G. G was one letter that many people didn't know very well how to design it. And here you see another one, basically. Yeah, it's very funny as a kind of this E with a little tongue, like that. And yeah, this is kind of and these are the first 12 types appeared in Venice. Jenson is the second one. This is why I said before that there was not a canon, there was not a common shape for humanistic script. There were many possible, sources, and Jenson picked one source that became the normal, because, Jenson died without knowing it, but after a few years, all the Roman types in Venice were kind of copies of Jenson's Roman, like this. This is a type that was used still in Venice by the Gregori brothers. The most important among the copies, let's say, the kind of copies of Jenson comes from this book. This is the first appearance. We call it the Etna type, the Etna Roman, because this book is called the Etna, and it was its first appearance. The publisher was Aldus Manutius, very famous, very important, and this is the type. Interestingly enough, here we see a comparison between the two, the Etna and Jenson. The size is the same. The size of the letters are the same. The color is the same. There is just the Etna has a higher contrast, very little higher contrast. The letters are slightly more compact, all of them, but if you compare the single letters, are extremely the same. Now we're going to see. Capitals are different, because I think you can see, you look at that A and look at this O, because the Etna was one of the very first type where the capitals were smaller than ascenders, and this became a standard after all. Jenson's capital that you see on the second row are bigger. They are not completely based, they're not really based on imperial Roman inscriptions. You look at M, that M is, Jenson M comes from manuscripts, medieval manuscripts, while the one on top is the Etna is fully based on imperial scripts that you can find on Roman ruins. The lowercase, anyway, is extremely similar, apart from one letter, of course, that is E, where the punch cutter of the Etna, Francesco Griffo, made the central bar of V horizontal, and this became a standard too. But if we compare the ratio between the different letter forms, how is A, like if you design a type today, you start from an A to design from an N to design an A. If we check the ratio between the different letters, basically they are the same. I was saying to Onur before, Aldus was a partner of Torresanus. Torresanus was the guy who had all the material from Jenson when Jenson died. Printers, the presses, and type. So the idea is that this guy studied, the Jenson Roman as punches, actually. The same guys, I'm going a little bit fast because I'm afraid that the same guy invented, there was the first to cut in italic, It was the same guy for Aldus, who Aldus started this series of books, very kind of pocket, almost books, with classical contents. Anyway, the Etna was extremely important because 40 years later in Paris, there was a new wave of types. But the most famous one is, of course, Garamond, Claude Garamond. We are going to see now. But before Garamond, there was other printers, other punch cutters, who cut this new style of Roman type. Heinrich Vervliet wrote a lot of interesting things about this. And please have a look at the capital M on top. And this is the type this is the same of a text. And look at capital M. And now look at the Etna capital M. You see? So it was a tribute. It was a tribute because all the Roman types cut in Paris before 1550s had this M without the upper right serif. And the only type who had this feature was the Etna. So these people knew, this is Augereau. No, this is still Maître Constantin, this is Augereau. This is another type, but you see again the M and the general thing is the same. The general feeling is the same. And Augereau was the master of Garamond. And Garamond was the most famous among these punch cutters in Paris. This is Estienne book printed with Garamond's type. Garamond was famous especially for his Greek du roi, the Greek that was cut exclusively for the king and using a very complex Greek with many ligatures and so on. But anyway, Garamond became famous, in the history of type for his Roman type, and his Roman type that he cut different sizes of his Roman type, but Garamond was still cutting an M like that, in the beginning. And if we check and if we compare the Garamond Roman type of about 16 points, the Grosse Romaine of Garamond, with the same size, that is the Etna, we see that the differences are extremely little. Think that this E is not original. It was changed after Garamond's death, but all the rest was original. And there was a guy called Firmin Didot, quite pretty important guy, who in the beginning of the 19th century, he wrote it in a book. He said Garamond did nothing but copying Francesco da Grifo da Bologna. And he took all the grants. Yeah, he really. This was one of the amazing, quotation that James Mosley was able to find in a footnote of a book that nobody knew. Okay. Third part. Jenson actually didn't care much of his Roman. This is something that cares. It's us to care about him. Because Jenson, after using his Roman type for 4 years, he basically threw it out of the window and he started printing with rotunda. Because rotunda was the style for liturgic and law books, for law editions. And law books were the thing where were becoming rich at the time, because were huge books used all over Europe, because whoever was managing from a country to a church need to know law. And law was still the same law that was written here by Costantino. It was the same. And Jenson printed many editions with that. And the rotunda was coming from the traditional, handwriting of medieval age that comes south of the Alps, because north of the Alps you have textura, the Gutenberg style. South of the Alps you have this rotunda, where the letters are a little bit less squarish, more rounded. But as I was saying before, this style was already crystallized. It became, a standard. It became the same. It doesn't change for 200 years before printing arrived. So we didn't need to do much more than copying what was there. I mean, it was already a type that had, this is from more or less the same time, beginning of the 70s, 1470s. You see that the single letters, apart from the connections like this, but the single letters are separated. This was normal for calligraphers at the time, so it was quite easy, let's say, for a punch cutter. This is Jenson's rotunda. And actually, Jenson's rotunda became much more much more influential than Jenson's Roman at the time. And Jenson saw this becoming influential because everyone was copying his rotundas. And here you see the first two rotundas, and then he cut other three later on. But the interesting thing is that the design is basically the same. You can see. Actually, interestingly, these two types were used together. The X height of this is exactly twice the X height of the other one. They were used in books like this, where you have the main text of low editions and the commentary of low edition. The commentary goes around the text. This was a normal layout in medieval. And then he cut other types with following again exactly the same shapes until a big type, about 28 points. The capitals were extremely fancy, but the lowercase are all basically the same design. Can you see that? These are the 5 types. Again, this was copied everywhere. It's very difficult to find a rotunda type that after 1475 was not following Jenson in the lowercase. Basically, everyone was following Jenson. And you see the shapes. What changes is the X height. It's the X height and a little bit the thickness of the thick strokes, but the rest is the same. Here I made some comparison about, the difference of them, the X height, the width of the letters, and so on. This is a book later on just to show how Jenson's rotunda letter forms became a standard. This was 20 years after Jenson's death, in Venice still, but all over Europe. Well, actually, this was printed in Venice, but was for the English market. So, starting from this, from Jenson's type, some years ago, I designed a rotunda just for fun, more than any other reasons, actually, because rotunda doesn't have big markets today, here. Yeah, of course. And I just go very fast to show some, examples yeah, this is pretty nice. It's Venice, in Venice, a nice place where to drink and eat. Okay. The digital revival of the Etna Roman. So everything that I'm going to say now comes from this book that I wrote with my friend Michele Patané. So we started from the Etna because the Etna doesn't have a proper revival. So we started and we decided to apply, because Michele and I have been teaching at the University of Reading to the master students for 12 years now, a workshop on making a revival of historical types. So we gather all this knowledge, information we had, and we decided to apply to a type that didn't have any revival yet. And so we did with the Etna. So this is, Michele and I always keep saying to the students, you need to spend a lot of time in analyzing the original thing before starting drawing. So you need to spend a lot of hours. So we have many strategies to try to understand, the thickness. How is the thickness of the stamps compared to the X height, or how the thickness is between lowercase and uppercase, or how are the curves? The curves are perfect circle, or they are somehow compressed. These kind of things. This is just a digital way of analyzing, but we don't ask the students to do it digitally. It's just And then we are also comparing different letter forms, like we do today in digital. We just go to try to understand as many information as we can from all the letters. Why we do this? Because we actually need we need to adapt what we have in a 15th century book, or also in an 18th century book. We need to adapt it to the technology of today. But I'm not talking about the technology of how to make a type, but the technology of how we render or we print things, because if you have a printing press and you print on on paper at the time, ink at the time, it will have a completely different feeling that if you print on a rotary press today, or if you print in digital. Just to give you an example, this is Gerardunger A's from a book printed a few years ago in rotary printing. And these are Jenson's A. So which A are you going to pick up to make a revival? You need to analyze many of them to try to understand which was the shape of the original A. Another example is that there was no overshooting at all. So basically, Garamond, this is Garamond. Garamond was cutting an O, but was as big as a Z. If you do it now, today, your teacher will just, shout at you. Yeah, of course, because it will look much smaller. So if you do a revival, this is Slimbach's work, Adobe Garamond, you have to make a O. You have to raise a O. Otherwise, it looks awful. So we started from my images of the Etna. We started with a very what you call it, faithful digitalization, so very rough, without correcting, let's say, the main proportion, without correcting anything, without making adjustment, basically. The only thing we don't follow the bumps, because that is something we actually don't think it's good. So from the first digitization, we start, checking on what I told you. So the overshooting, the right proportion, the right thickness, the alignment of things. And then we still on fine-tuning, so we start working on the proportions because, our N and our A need to be close with a certain proportions, and it's highly probable that Jenson didn't, or Francesco Griffo didn't do like that because he was not working in digital, of course. And we keep on checking. So, okay, let's check the relationship between our A and our N, and check the relationship between Jenson's A and Jenson's N, and try to do something similar. We keep on doing that. So this is the first step and the last fine-tuning, or this is the same. Basically, you see the same visualization. So basically, the red is exactly how Francesco Griffo designed it. I mean, a digitization of that. And the blue is how we changed it. So this is the type today. Sorry, I'm going a little bit fast. What we did, we did an optical size, because of course today, if you use a type, you can't use a type from 6 points to 60 points. It will, if it's good at 6 points, it will look ugly at 16 points. Or if it's good at 16 points, you won't read it at 6 points. So you need an optical size. So we decided to make a version that it works with small text. And this is basically our set of, we made just 2 masters, caption and display. The display is based on the Etna, because the Etna size originally was 16 points, but was very sharp for very high contrast. And it has been used in some cultural things like this in Bologna, where there was the new rebranding of the museum, of the local museum, and it worked pretty well. As I said, Griffo was the first who cut an italic, so we had to add an italic to our type. And we start checking Griffo's italic. Well, unfortunately, I need to go fast, but we should discuss a lot about this, because you can see just from these few images that was extremely rough and extremely difficult to make a revival out of this. Just to show you the high variability of the slant of the letters. It was completely crazy. Our first digitization of this looked so ugly that we had to change it much more than we had thought in the beginning, because it's completely rough. So this is our italic. Now we haven't released now, but it's finished. We are using in some projects. I think it works pretty well. And this is another thing that we don't have. There is no Griffo's italic on the market. So it works pretty well. Well, by the way, the second set of capitals was the original set of capitals, because Griffo had a set of capitals very small and upright. But we had, to make it work better with the Roman, we had to add a second set of capitals. The type was used in the last issue of Idea magazine, where I wrote an article, and I wrote an article about the Etna type, and they decided to use the type for the magazine. That was pretty nice. Okay, so a completely different project. So you have historical sources, and you can do a revival because you decide that you like that, peculiar type, or you can do something else. This I'm going to show comes from writing. When I was a master's student there was, Jerry Leonidas, was one of the teachers. The other teachers was late Gerhard Unger, great designer and friend. And the type that I designed there was called the Xenon. I need to say that it was a luxury to work with these people, to have 1 year to focus on a type, something that I will never have in my life. Why Xenon, first of all? Xenon was a character of a book, an historical book of Marguerite Yourcenar. And Xenon, Xenon was a physician from the Low Countries at the end of the 15th century, at the end of 16th century, sorry, so a bit later from what is my favorite period, but anyway. And he was a fictional character. This is the reason why I took the name. It was a fictional character where the author put many historical figures into that. So he took something from, Campanella, something from Leonardo da Vinci, and he blended different things from these people into one single character. And it's exactly what I tried to do with my type. So I wanted to do something that wasn't a revival, but somehow looked like a revival. And my idea, my favorite example was Plantain, the monotype typeface from 1911, where it was a revival, but actually it was not. Also because they took, in the beginning it was a revival of this type, that is a Grandjean Cicero, beautiful type. But actually, they didn't know, because it was very early, but they didn't have the right A. They have another A that came from much later, from the 18th century. It was mixed in the same box. So, but anyway, they did a beautiful type, even with the wrong A, So I decided to start from different sources. This is a Roman type from Venice that I like very much, very rough. Look at the G, how rough is G, very almost ugly G. So I look at many sources, and I also look at one digital source, because one of my favorite type before starting designing type was Fred Meyer's Quadrat, but I think it's still a great typeface. So I also studied, what Fred did in his type. My workflow, I show just a few things. My workflow is completely digital. What I did, now I'm not doing anymore. What I did was after designing letters, I was printing them very, very large, hanging on the wall, and start sketching on it. Like I did this, or some things of it, adding parts or with a white ink, taking off parts, and then I was doing the same thing in digital. Now, actually, I don't do that anymore. I just do it in digital. Just show a few letters just to see. The X-side is 50% of the body, and capital and ascenders and descenders are more or less the same, about 25%. The apertures are not very big. They're much smaller than a standard Renaissance type like Garamond, Adobe Garamond here. The unlikely what they did in the Renaissance, I kept the same kind of terminal in all the letters. That is, it has this tension in A and C. And I did it from a regular to a black, basically. And this is the lowercase. So the lowercase, as I said, it was inspired on several types, but not taken from any actual type. The main peculiarity is that the letters are not completely upright. They are slightly slanted, and they are not, slanted with a constant slant. They just change a little bit. And this gives, to me, a very strange, interesting, unregular feeling in the printed page, basically. Capitals actually come from one source, that is another type, another version of the Etna type that was used by Aldus in this famous book, the Polyphilus book, that was one of the most famous books in the 15th century. And he used these very epigraphic capitals that I like very much. So I start analyzing them, trying to understand, the proportions, the difference between different letters, how you can starting from an H, you do an M, or, the angles of certain shapes. I did what I would do in digital today. I take one letter and I overlay it with others. I try to understand how he built it to done something similar again. And these are the capitals. So this is the reason why I call it a potpourri, because it doesn't have one source, it has many sources, and they are blended all together to such a point that we cannot call it a revival. Also because the proportions are more modern. Look at the width of the letters, and look at the width of the letters of Adobe Garamond. You see that in Adobe Garamond, the variation is much higher, because this is how they did it in 15th century. But I didn't want a 15th century type. I wanted something that it was more contemporary. And this is also due to Gerhard Unger. And this is a trick by Gerhard Unger that I like to show around, because it's interesting for type designers. Basically, Gerhard once told me, well, I think you could go a little bit more compressed in the lowercase. And I said, yeah, I need to try. Well, do this. So set the same type the same text 6 times on a page. And then in InDesign, in a very rough way, you start taking 1% of horizontal expansion every time. You do it very roughly in InDesign, and you print it. And you will see if your original one is too wide. And actually, it was too wide. So I decided, after several tests, I decided to go to 96. And so I compress 96% in glyphs after making this test in InDesign. Finally, last thing, the italic. Italic, I took it from several sources. My favorite one is this very famous Grandjean italic, very crazy. It's the beginning of Baroque italics, very spiky, as you can see. I like it very much. And I try to follow his very depth, his very deep connections. This is the italics, but I also took it from I took details from other things. You look at, for instance, at the bottom of P and Q, that thing comes from the calligraphy at the end of the 16th century, that calligraphers that followed Cresci, but were doing this very strange kind of, terminal things at the bottom of P and Qs, and I took it from there. And also, the capitals come from several different, sources. I did this thing with the serifs to make them not consistent on both sizes. And look at, for instance, if you see N was taken from another type by Grandjean, you see there, but another italic by Grandjean where he cut this strange N. So this is the italic at the end, and this is the old family. So this was just to show that history is actually extremely rich as a database. Is extremely rich. We can spend all life just studying all types and find solutions or find suggestions to make something new today. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Fabulous. Thank you, Riccardo. Well, it's a very dense and very rich talk, and I would like to ask the audience if you have any questions. Please.
Welcome, and thank you very much. First of all, I'm sorry for my English. I'm just curious about the ethics of revival. What should we consider if we make a revival? Should we wait 50 years to make a revival, 100 years? Should we wait to die of a designer of a typeface? What do you think about ethics of revivals? Thank you.
This is an interesting question that goes to the root of revivals. First of all, there is not a single... Michele and I decided to make to give a definition of revival, to try to, it's our definition. We don't want to make, that this is the only definition of revival. But the term revival is very loose. You know, it can cover many things. To us, the main point is that you are doing, you are reviving a typeface that is not available in the technology, current technology. So basically, if I design a type that was produced in the early 20th century, or also after the Second World War, but is not digitized, there is no way to use it today, that is a legitimate source of revival. On the other hand, if I decide to make a revival of Susanna Lichko typeface, I mean, Susanna Lichko typefaces are still on sale on web. So I wouldn't call it a revival. That was a copy or something like that, And then, of course, you would, meet many troubles with copyright and everything like that. So I think, but there is also more than that. A revival is a conscious decision by the designer, because, to make a revival, usually designers link the type they have designed to the revival, and the main thing, the most common way to link the thing is the name. So, Bembo, the famous monotype Bembo, Bembo was the name of the author, of the writer of the Etna. This is a way, to connect. Bembo was based on the Etna, and they connect. Stanley Morrison decided to give this credit. So usually, when you have a revival, you have a connection in the name. And anyway, the revival doesn't come by chance. It's the designer that wants to make a revival.
And actually, it's also, as you said, it's an enormous creative process, because there are a great deal of things that are lost but also gained.
Yeah.
So perhaps this is why the technology difference.
Yes.
That it should be some sort of a technologically speaking, it should be a transfer.
Yes.
Or an adaptation.
An adaptation. Adaptation, I think, is the right word.
Yeah.
An adaptation to a different technology, but also to a different habits, because a typeface of the 15th century was used exclusively to make books. If you think how you use typeface today, you use it to make book is just a secondary, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions?
Thank you for the amazing presentation. Actually, it was too fast for me. I wish I had chance to see each image for 10 minutes. Okay. Yeah. And I wonder, maybe it might be idea for another research project, maybe, I don't know if it's your concern or not, but I saw that when you showed Jenson's type and compare it with the type from the same period, Jenson's characters were very smooth, at the same time very sharp, and the ink was somehow darker. Maybe it depends on the quality of the paper or the ink or all the technology behind it. I don't know. Did you make any research about the paper sources or the techniques or the ink or any other materials used in this era? I really wonder about the technology behind Jenson's characters also.
Yeah, I didn't do that, but I relied on people who did, because I'm not an expert. But there are good studies about paper, not much about ink. And basically, the only important historian of ink is, according to him, the main change in ink industry was in the 19th century, when basically they start using machines to grind, the black powder of ink. Before that was very coarse. It's true that Jenson was very good in choosing high quality material. much better than many of his competitors. And his paper came from Fabriano, but was not the, maybe the main, but for sure the most, the highest quality producer of paper in Italy, at least. And it's very difficult to how to say. I don't think that the success of Jenson in the beginning, at this time, was related to the shape of the letters. This is something that we can discuss it today. You know, the success of Jenson was the quality of his books and the quality of his trade network. That was how it was. And I think that the quality of his book and the quality of his trade networks also helped his type to become a standard. You know, if his type was used by someone who disappeared a few years later and nobody, probably it didn't become a standard. It wouldn't have become a standard. So there is always a connection between the success of, but this is not just Jenson, this is also Baskerville or whatever you want to think about, Bodoni, Didot. The success of the printer, publisher, is the main reason why that type became standard or famous. The secondary reason is that it's a good type, but this is something that we can discuss it now.
Okay. Any other question?
I'm sorry, it was fast. It was a bit of my mistake. But I put too many things in it, and I realized at the half of it that I was at a half. So,
well, thank you very much, Riccardo. Thank you for your talk.
thank you.
Wonderful. Bir sonraki ISType için sosyal medya hesabını çok arada bir kullanıyoruz ama sitemizi takip edebilirsiniz. Efendim? Birazcık daha fazla yapmaya gayret ediyoruz ama tabii ki işte tahmin edebileceğiniz sebeplerden ötürü bir yere kadar. But yeah, stay tuned. You may follow us from our social media and our website, and we will be in touch. Probably in March, we said, in March we should be organizing, and we will be announcing it probably in the next couple months. Another Italian designer will be with us. We should have made it as duo, you know. Okay. Thank you very much again for coming. Hoşça kalın, görüşürüz.